Night Shift Whispers.
The silent corridors loom before me each night, their stillness broken by the occasional mysterious whisper or cry of pain from an invisible presence. Building C, 6th floor, was indeed rarely occupied by patients, but for those who were treated here, it was often their final resting place. 7 to 10 people were admitted to this ward, almost all of them chronic cancer patients. 90% of them die here. I was assigned to the night shift, and I was always the only cleaning staff on this floor. My duties were to ensure the cleanliness and tidiness of the corridors, and to also be a general assistant for the nurses, who were also few in number, only 3 per shift. The task of cleaning each room and changing sheets was handled by the morning and afternoon shifts, so my duties were not physically demanding. However, psychologically, the job was anything but easy. The first few weeks were filled with stress and fear. I eventually became accustomed to my surroundings and was able to carry out my duties with a sense of indifference. However, the strange noises still sent shivers down my spine. As time passed, the disturbances became more daring. They began to call my name, move the trash cans along the corridor, and even push the waiting bench into people's way. Tidying up misplaced items became my main task, as the corridor rarely got dirty in a place that was so rarely used. I was not the only one who had experienced these strange occurrences. Other cleaning staff members had also resigned after being harassed by similar phenomena. Building C, 6th floor, was a place of the dead, and it seemed that the spirits of those who had passed there were reluctant to let go. Still fresh in my mind is the first apparition that dared to manifest itself before me. That night, Eric, a senior nurse on duty, asked me to make coffee for him. As he spoke, he prepared to make his rounds of the rooms, a record-breaking 10 patients that night. The pantry was nearby, separated from the nurse's desk by only 2 bathroom stalls. Though the others hadn't asked, I took the initiative to brew 4 cups of coffee at once, 1 for Eric, 1 for each of his 2 junior nurses, and 1 for myself. It took less than 15 minutes to prepare the coffee. When I carried the tray of 4 cups to the nurse's station, I saw Eric sitting at his desk, writing something. I assumed he had delegated the task of checking on the patients to his 2 assistants and returned to his desk to attend to more important matters. "The coffee, sir," I said, placing a cup on his desk and the other 3 on the adjacent desk. He smiled and nodded. I then proceeded to the farthest corridor to check on its condition while waiting for my coffee to cool down. As usual, several trash cans had been shifted from their original positions, so it took me a little longer to clean them up. On my return, I ran into Eric at the corner before the main corridor. He asked about his coffee. I was confused, as I had just given him his coffee and he had accepted it. He denied it, saying that he had not returned to his desk since asking me to make coffee earlier. His 2 assistants corroborated his story, stating that they had been accompanying him on his rounds the entire time. I was stunned. Who, then, had been sitting at his desk? "Forget it," Eric said, trying to calm me down. He seemed unfazed by the incident. Since everyone coped with such occurrences in their own way, I had to learn to do the same. The incident passed, and so did my ability to become more indifferent to the pranks of the ghosts on the 6th floor. A few weeks later, I witnessed the second apparition. It was a figure in a patient uniform with the physical appearance of an ordinary patient. However, its entrance into the room was extraordinary. It passed through the door and disappeared into thin air, like mist escaping a net. I was starting to become desensitized to these occurrences, and I didn't bother to check the room it had entered. Whatever it was, I didn't care. The third incident was even more bizarre. As I was walking through the corridors, I came across a large pool of blood at the farthest end. It was splashed onto the walls as if a large balloon full of blood had just been exploded. I knew this was impossible. Whose blood could it be? The farthest corridor was rarely used, and it was impossible for such an incident to occur without being captured by CCTV surveillance. Yet, I felt compelled to go and get a mop and bucket, even though I wasn't sure if the blood was real or an illusion. As expected, when I returned with the mop, the corridor floor was already as clean as it had been before. I sighed. The fishy smell that had been so pungent earlier still lingered in my mind, and the nausea in my stomach hadn't abated. Intent on getting some fresh air, I continued walking to the end of the corridor where there was a balcony overlooking the hospital's backyard. Many dense trees grew there. Upon the balcony's edge, a sexagenarian woman sat in her wheelchair, clad in a patient's gown, her neck adorned with an aged blue scarf. Her gaze was vacant, fixed upon the treetops. I glanced at my watch. It was 2 a.m. What was this patient doing here in an hour when she should be asleep? Before I could greet her, she turned to me and smiled. "Don't worry," she said, as if she could read the trepidation on my face. "They're just being playful, but they're not dangerous." I was baffled by her ability to discern the predicament I faced. However, I realized that such occurrences were no longer a secret, and that even patients were likely being harassed. After a brief conversation, I continued with my work. She informed me that she had been admitted to and discharged from this hospital on multiple occasions over the past 2 years. She was almost always placed on this floor in this building, so she was familiar with everything here. The following night, at precisely 2 a.m, I was cleaning the farthest corridor when I spotted her again. She was still wearing the same blue scarf and the same kind smile. This time, we chatted for a bit longer. For months, this became our routine. Every night at 2 a.m, I would make time to meet her and chat with her briefly. We became emotionally close, like mother and child. A year passed. I couldn't believe I had managed to work there for that long. Perhaps, if it hadn't been for the woman in the blue scarf, I would have considered giving up. But her presence distracted me from the terror of the voices and apparitions. As I grew closer to the nurses, we began following each other on social media. An old post on Rose's account, the only female nurse on the 6th floor, caught my attention. The woman in the blue scarf was in one of the photos she posted, posing with Rose and Eric against a backdrop of a crowd gathered in the auditorium. That was the hospital's anniversary, Rose explained when she saw me paying special attention to the photo. "Our last memory with Mrs. Smith," she added, her expression somber. "Mrs. Smith?" I asked, confused. "Yes, the woman in the blue scarf," she replied. "But what do you mean by last memory?" I asked, still confused. "She passed away a few days after that event," she replied. "What?" I felt frozen for a moment. I didn't know what I was feeling. My brain refused to process what Rose had just said. I simply felt blank for a very long time. That night, I refused to believe Rose's words. As usual, at 2 a.m, I headed to the same balcony where I and the woman who turned out to be Mrs. Smith used to meet. I hoped she would still be waiting there, smiling at me, asking me how my day was, and so on. But this time, she wasn't there anymore. I waited there until 3 in the morning, but she never showed up. The next night and the night after that, she was still gone. She never showed up again. Unwilling to believe it, I checked the patient data. There was no name Mrs. Smith. Her last treatment at the hospital was 13 months ago, and it was stated that she had checked out because she was no longer curable. One night, I discovered an old blue scarf in my locker. It had a lovely fragrance. I could faintly hear the soft whisper of a voice that was so familiar to my ears. "Take care. Goodbye."